Hi, this is Jim at your Jiffy Customer Support Network. In this segment, we're going to cover the proper servicing of the Jiffy 15-to-1 gearbox transmission. We're going to go ahead and cover the procedure to take the unit apart. We're also going to be showing you how to replace the clutch drum drive system, and the main gear and shaft assembly. I'm going to be utilizing the new Jiffy Model 4G ice drill, which is powered by the Jiffy overhead valve 4-stroke engine. No matter what unit you're servicing the 15-to-1 gearbox, whether it's a 2-stroke unit or a 4-stroke powered unit, the first step you want to take is make sure that you drain all of the fuel out of the fuel tank. So that's the first step you want to take. And then if you do happen to be servicing a 15-to-1 gearbox on a 4-stroke unit, you want to also make sure that you drain all the oil out of the engine, because you don't want oil migrating out of the carburetor or into the muffler or into the cylinder bore. So those are two things you want to make note of, to make sure you drain all the fuel out of the unit as well as all the oil out of any of the 4-stroke units before you start any procedure where you're going to work on the 15-to-1 gearbox. The next step we're going to take is to remove the bolts that hold the handle assembly and the upper gear case to the lower gear case cover. And the first bolts we're going to go ahead and remove are the two bolts located directly under the muffler that hold the handle assembly to the gear case. Then we're going to go ahead and remove the bolt directly below the valve cover that hold the two case halves in place. Then we'll go ahead and remove the two bolts that hold the handle assembly and case halves together on the carburetor air cleaner side of the engine. And then last but not least, the bolt that holds the lower case to the upper case on the fuel tank side of the engine. I've taken the liberty to go ahead and pre-loosen these. As you take these off, you want to note that there's a lock washer as well as a flat washer on each of the bolts. You'll make sure that they're in position when you put those back on. And once you get those out of position, you'll see that the handles come off as well. And then the last one is down below the fuel tank. Now that I've got the unit laying on its side with the muffler down, I'm going to go ahead and grab the main shaft and pull that off along with the lower case half. You'll note that the main gear and shaft assembly is in that lower case. I'm going to set that aside and we'll talk about that in a minute. The next step we're going to take is to go ahead and remove these 4 mounting bolts that'll remove the top half. Now that we've got those 4 mounting bolts loosened, I'll go ahead and remove those, noting that there's a lock washer on top and a flat washer on the bottom of each one of those, making sure that those are in position when you reassemble everything. And I'll go ahead and pull the top cover off. Note the spline that's attached to the clutch drum, which the clutch drives. And again, I'm going to set that aside and we'll cover some more things on that in a minute. The next thing we're going to note is the fact that the clutch drive itself is attached to the crankshaft on the engine. And we'll show you how to disassemble that in a second also. But basically, those are all the parts that you can actually service within that transmission if something happens with that drive system. If you ever have to service the clutch drum or pinion assembly, which is found in the upper portion of the gear case. The clutch drum itself is driven by the clutch that's on the engine, which then drives the pinion gear that's part of the clutch drum and pinion assembly, and that drives the main gear that then drives the main shaft that drives the drill assembly. But if there's any concerns ever that you have with it, the proper procedure for disassembling this is to basically drive the pinion down through the bottom of the clutch drum and out the bottom part of the case. And basically what I use is a 4x4 piece of hardwood with a couple washers on top, nice and simple and easy. And basically what I'm trying to do is support this bearing, because that's just a press fit bearing into the case, so that doesn't come out. I just slide that pinion down into that. Then I take a punch and just basically drive that pinion down through, which then you're able to either replace the clutch drum or the pinion. In order to reassemble the clutch drum and pinion, basically we're going to drive the pinion down through the top of the clutch drum. And we'll place the clutch drum again directly over the hole, get the pinion in position, and just take a hammer and pound that back down through. And we want to just drive that pinion, just recess that down in a little bit further than the bottom of the clutch drum. And so that's ready to be reinstalled back into the upper case. The next step is to assemble the clutch drum and pinion back into the upper case, and basically all I do is use my block of wood with the two washers, set that directly over that, place the clutch drum in position, and just tap that back in. And I'm probably going to just recess that pinion just below the surface of the bottom of the clutch drum again. And that basically is a proper procedure for servicing the clutch drum and pinions assembly in the upper case. In order to replace the clutch, all you basically do is take a punch and a hammer and set the point of the punch down in one of the hollows on the face of the clutch and just tap it counterclockwise. And that'll loosen up the clutch from the crank. And we'll spin that off, and that basically removes the clutch assembly. There's a thrust washer below that. You want to make sure when you're reassembling it, there's a recess in the clutch itself that you're going to want to note that this washer fits down into. So you want to note that in reassembly. To reassemble the clutch, basically take the washer and put it inside the new clutch, again noting that you've got the recessed side of it. Just position that back on the crankshaft and just spin that back on again. And you want to do the same thing to tighten it up. Just take your punch and now clockwise just tap that twice and your clutch will be back in position again. To service or replace the main gear and shaft assembly, which is located in the bottom cover, all you basically do is push up on the main shaft out the bottom and then just pull the main gear assembly out of the cover. So whether you're replacing the cover or the main gear, that's basically how that comes apart. And all you do is, if your main gear, if you're replacing it, just slide it back in the cover. You want to make sure before you put if it's a new gear, you want to make sure that you just cover the outer gears with a good synthetic all-season grease. Now, in order to reassemble the gear case, The first thing we're going to do is slide the upper case half on. And first of all, make sure that the lock washer and washer is in position on each of the bolts. We'll just go ahead and start each of those bolts. Then we'll go ahead and tighten those up. The next step we're going to go ahead and take is to remount the lower case and the main gear and shaft assembly back to the upper case. And all we're going to do is grab a hold of the shaft. We want to make sure also that the thrust bearing is in place before we put it back on. We'll slide that back into the bearing. Get that back in position. And then the first two bolts that we'll go ahead and mount are the one on the fuel tank side and then the one on the spark plug side of the unit. We'll want to take note that there are two shorter mounting bolts. The longer mounting bolt with the lock washer and flat washer is the bolt that goes on the fuel tank side of the unit. Go ahead and just start that on loose. And we'll go ahead and take the bolt on the spark plug side of the unit, push that up through, slide the flat washer onto the bolt where it comes through, and then go ahead and start the lock nut. And we'll go ahead and tighten those up. Now that those first two bolts are in place, the next step I'm going to do is go ahead and mount the handle on the spark plug side of the unit. And it's a handle that has the control lever on it. A special note I'm going to make is this bracket that holds the handles in place. If you note, the hole in the bracket is offset to one side. The shorter side goes toward the engine. So just keep that in mind. So we'll go ahead and get the handle in. Here's how we get it up through the handle. We'll go ahead and slide it up through the plate. And we'll go ahead and start the lock nut. I'm going to do the same on the other side of the unit. We'll take the bolt, slide it up through, take the plate, slide that up through, and we'll go ahead and start the nut on the top of that. Then we'll go ahead and take the other handle, move it into position, slide the bolt up through the handle, and then into the plate. And we'll go ahead and start that lock nut. Again, we won't tighten down any of these lock nuts until we get everything finger tight here. And then the last bolt up through the handle, through the plate, and we'll go ahead and start that nut on. Then we'll go ahead and tighten down those nuts. And once you get those last mounting bolts tightened up and the handles all back in position properly, then the last thing you're going to want to do is go ahead and refill the engine crankcase with 0W40 oil to make sure you've got the proper lubrication back in the unit. And then you'll also want to double check the oil fill level once you put the oil in to make sure you didn't overfill it or underfill it. That basically concludes the proper procedure for servicing the various parts in the HTT Jiffy transmission. If anyone has any questions or concerns regarding this procedure, please feel free to contact us at the two locations noted on your screen. I'd like to take this time to thank you for your continued support of Jiffy products, the purchase of your Jiffy Istro, and have a great day.